welcome to a much awaited episode of Be Free, Be Fun and Be Fearless. And as usual, we very much follow those themes as I'm joined today by my wonderful friend, Sandro Boeri, an entrepreneur today, but not so long ago, a corporate governor. Tell me about that, Sandro.
Quite a contrast, isn't it, Rana? Corporate governor versus an entrepreneur. Let me tell you the story of my life in 2 or 3 minutes, very quickly. I started life as an internal auditor in 1979. You must be wondering what on earth I'm doing talking to Rana today. Well, as I progressed through as an internal auditor, I started becoming more and more intrigued about the human being and the human condition. Why? I guess a lot of us are old enough to remember the global financial crisis when banks basically blew up our societies. And I was there in the battlefield watching banks blowing themselves up and wondering, why on earth are you guys behaving in the way you're behaving? And I came to a very simple conclusion that it's to do with human beings. Human beings are not logical creatures. They're actually very emotional, very illogical creatures. So my job as a corporate governor, an internal auditor, a consultant with financial services, gave me the chance to research and study culture. In other words, the way different human beings interact with each other, and gave me the chance to apply these techniques in my day-to-day work until very recently. I departed the financial services sector. And here I am now feeling very entrepreneurial with my dear, dear friend, Rana, my dear, dear friend that started life poking my gums around trying to fix my teeth and stop my teeth from falling out, which was the beginning of a wonderful journey, isn't it?
Quite a journey together, Sandro, definitely. So yes, so you are fresh out of having left Deutsche Bank, said goodbye to the corporate world, worked very heavily in the financial services. And one of the things I found fascinating a couple of years ago on your journey with Deutsche is that you started to develop the culture for Deutsche Bank, when no one else had tackled this before. And I even remember you saying, I'm being approached by so many people from LinkedIn to get ideas for themselves of how they can create culture within their big, diverse, and for some of them, financial organizations. So tell us a little bit about what you think culture is for a big organization.
The challenge that I had and my colleagues had was trying to understand patterns of human behavior. I mean, what is culture? Culture is a recurrent pattern of human behavior. And if you can understand what that pattern is, and you can understand, and this is the beautiful part, you can understand why people behave in a way they behave, then you've got a chance of influencing the way people behave in a way that is aligned to what an organization is trying to achieve. So really had the chance to explore what drives human behavior, to explore how you can measure culture, how you can influence culture. And that also got me into quite an inquisitive mode to understand what drives individual human beings. I mean, culture is a collective phenomenon, a collection of humans behaving in a particular way. But the human condition is about self, is about the way you behave, Rana, or the way I behave. And now I'm determined to take that knowledge into the nail it world, which I'm really fascinated in pursuing.
We'll get on to that in a minute, but just
sorry, I'm dying to talk about it.
I know, it's like itching. But with this whole thing, about culture, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you're talking about how people behave, how people think, how people interact with each other. And I'm curious as to why is it so much harder in an organization to transmit that culture to the people and the environment than it is on an individual level. In other words, on an individual level, when you become conscious enough, you determine who you are, why you are, what your values are. You align with those around you who have similar or equal values. Hopefully you get rid of all the stuff and elevate yourself to success, whatever success means to you. And I mean, that sounds brilliant in principle as an individual. Why is it such a challenge to bring that into an organization, to create the same elevated dynamic culture so that everybody succeeds and you create an everybody wins environment?
Let's start with the premise that the human being is a social creature. And I would argue, above almost all else, a human being will pay a very high price to belong. So what does belonging mean in a large corporation? Belonging means being seen to be one of the crowd, fitting in. So not all human beings are equally powerful. Some human beings are more influential, more controlling than others. And if I want to belong to that gang, I've got to decide whether I want to pay the price, the entry price to belong to that gang. And something that I've witnessed over the years, and you see this in the level of misconduct fines that we've seen in the financial services industry, this gang-like behavior will sometimes turn out to be very, very toxic. So therefore, how can we turn that around? If we want to create a benign, positive culture, we've got to start finding a way of putting the mirror up to people's faces, collective people's faces, in a way that they can understand the consequences of their behavior, and in a way that they can actually start to look into their soul and really understand, is this really what I want my gang to be? Really what I want to be part of this gang? And I see my purpose in life as finding ways that are rooted and grounded in behavioral science that we can use to put up to people's faces to help turn these cultures round in a way that is benign, helpful to the business, but more importantly, helpful to the societies in which we operate. I'm driven, Rana, by some of the most horrific experiences that have happened to me in my past as a result of toxic cultures. And quite frankly, I want to get out of bed every morning trying to help people avoid some of the stuff that's happened to me and some of the stuff that I've witnessed.
So there are a couple of points I would love to pick up on. One is obviously the story piece in a minute, but when you were talking about that, it made me think about some of the companies and organizations I've gone into and the research-backed assessments that we are able to do on people, both in terms of measuring the culture and raising that level of consciousness within the organization, and how we are actually able to measure it and measure the success of it as we continue to work with people. Because you used a very powerful word there, and that was toxic. And I'm sure we can all think of a toxic situation. You hear it very much in social media now on a personal level, don't you? People being in toxic relationships. But there are also these toxic organizations or toxic cultures. And what does toxicity lead to, right? Toxicity is about poison, if we're taking the origin of the word. So when you poison someone or you poison something, you either poison the way they think about it and their behaviors and attitudes towards it, or you make that person sick. You make them ill. And obviously, in my case, well, you know my story, and I always happily share it, to the point where I was so successful in my career, accolades galore, would give myself a pat on the back every time I could put my name in Google, and yes, there's another hit there. Look, I've done another thing, and I've been to another country and spoken at another speech or had another research paper published. And that is how I used to drive my life and my success, based upon all of that. And you know about my term, wantaholic, because that is very much what I was. That's what used to feed me, to the point where it did become toxic, because I never took time to understand myself as an individual. And I got drawn into other people's beliefs, other people's cultural thoughts and influences, to the point where I got to the point, as you know, where I couldn't even walk, and then was facing a world where my career was about to come crashing down, as was my personal life. And I'd already hit quite a few self-destruct buttons there as well. And I was well and truly faced with toxicity, poisoned, only I was poisoning myself.
Yeah, I can relate to it. A psychiatrist will probably tell you why I'm programmed to please people. So I believe my entry price to the gang is to please people. In other words, not to say no. Well, that not saying no led me into the first 6 years of my career, essentially being bullied out of existence almost by a boss. It led me to witness people compromising themselves to a position where they're not willing to speak up when they see wrong. Quite frankly, it led me to witness all sorts of behaviors that in today's world, and by the way, I think today's world is actually a much more caring world, where some behaviors in today's world would be totally wrong, but were justified as being appropriate because that's the way the gang behaves, that's the way the herd behaves. So I think you and I, for different reasons perhaps, have lived in worlds of toxicity. And it doesn't have to be that way. There are ways of creating sustainable changes in behavior if we can just get people to understand that even in business terms, it's an investment worth making. It's an investment. I mean, who would, if we to ask for a little vote, please put your hand up if you believe that a toxic culture is going to make you money in a sustainable fashion. Who exactly would put their hand up? I'd be surprised if anybody would. And yet that's the reality.
Yeah, why does it happen? So let's talk about that a little bit, about investment. The ROI, one thing I witnessed very much, this whole thing about corporate well-being has become incredibly popular, understanding that everybody needs to look after themselves. But corporate well-being a lot of the time ends up being giving people half a day off, or allowing them to dress how they want to on a Friday to give them a bit of freedom, and of course hybrid working to allow them to go and cater to the other things and needs in their diary. But the reality is that isn't sustainable, is it? It's not going to create sustainable change. It might make a slightly happier individual, but for how long does that happiness actually last? So institutes certainly, and I know this is being looked at all the time as budgets are cut, is how can they truly and effectively invest in well-being to a point that there is an ROI.
Yeah.
So what is the ROI, Sandro?
I mean, first of all, I'm incredibly conscious that achieving sustainable change with a group of people, a team, and as a result, a culture, or with you or I as individuals, requires time, and by extension requires money. So I do believe it's critical that we can start to talk about what this return on investment might look like. So let's start with a defensive dimension. Focusing on sustainable behavioral change will reduce attrition. And we all know that when you lose staff, it costs you an awful lot of money and time to replace them, with all the risk attached.
And secondly, to train them appropriately to get them back up to level.
You've got to train them, which means there's an opportunity cost. The time I'm spending training, I'm not spending on my day job.
Exactly.
Undoubtedly reduces sickness. In other words, people not turning up in the workplace.
And when we're talking about sickness, we're talking about physical, mental, and emotional sickness, right?
Absolutely. But there's a real subtle dimension here. When we talk about mental sickness, we're talking about people not being engaged in their work. I mean, I'm here today. I'd like to think there's evidence I'm engaged today in this conversation. But I've had conversations with people that just look like zombies. At the end of the day, they're not mentally engaged with the work. That costs money. So from a defensive perspective,
I think just the point to say it costs money in terms of lack of productivity from your team members, that they may be physically there, but they're not performing at their best. So the output is not going to be there.
And let's talk about this output. Stuff is not getting delivered on time, or what is getting delivered on time is actually not fit for purpose. That's the defensive dimension of what we're talking about. But to use an Americanism, let's talk about the offensive part of this dimension. A positive culture gets human beings engaging what I call the 1 + 1 = 3 effect. In other words, if I trust you that you will not put down my idea, there's every chance that you and I will create an idea which is different, which is new, which creates value in itself. So if I'm working in an environment where I'm trying to create new products, I'm trying to find innovative ways of bettering our society, bettering my business, bettering my team, a positive culture is more likely to create that environment. That creates value. I mean, I've just come out of the financial services sector, which I think is demanding creativity, but doesn't always have the culture where people can actually create this 1 + 1 = 3 effect. Now, can I put a value on that return on investment? Can I tell you that we are going to invent an innovative way of bringing a new product to market, which is going to double my share price? No, I can't do that. But I'm hoping I can start to get you to reflect on what that additional value could look like and why it's so potent if we can invest in it.
Well, let's just bring in some stats here. So a happy team, when someone is happy, and I know people think, oh, happy is this fluffy, but when someone is happy, so has that element of fulfillment, their performance increases, their productivity increases by 14%. When somebody is in flow state, which means they're really performing at this incredible level of energy where they are able to have laser focus, and they feel joyful, energized, and can literally just produce, their productivity doubles. So can you imagine getting that from your team and even from yourself as a leader or an executive or as a professional, to be able to tap into flow state on a daily, regular basis where it actually doesn't require any effort? And to have your mood so elevated that you do feel joyful and happy, then your productivity increases. That starts with one person. And then you're talking about culture, right? You also talked about the individual. If you do that on an individual level, nothing is in isolation. That is always going to influence the transcendence piece of leadership, which is often the missing piece that people forget. That is going to influence everything around you and everybody who you work with.
It's viral. It's viral in a positive fashion. It's exponentially viral. By the way, I am glad that I've got into business with someone who focuses on data and scientific data. I'm less of a data-orientated person than you, but there is a lot of very solid support.
It is a scientist. Yeah, it is a scientist within me. And, one of the assessments that we use, I absolutely love it because we've got huge statistical data that show once we get people to this certain value that we measure through the Energy Leadership Index, people have reported significantly more satisfaction in 14 different areas of their lives, including their communication, their leadership skills, their productivity, their health, their financial status. And you take that into an organization beyond just the individual. That is the ROI.
And do you know what I really like about what we're trying to do? It's this emphasis on sustainability. I've gone on many courses during my career, and some courses, when I leave the course, I'm on a high, I'm on cloud 9. I feel this is the most wonderful thing that I've ever heard. And then Monday morning arrives, and it's almost as if that training course didn't occur. I'm back to my old ways. Something which for me is very important and goes to the very core of what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to support people with sustainable change. And that's critical, because that ultimately, it's the sustainability, it's this habit change, which is so important to what we're doing here.
Yeah, and you know what? It isn't even, you use the word trying a lot there, but actually the proof is in the pudding, and we have so many testimonials and client reports that show that we have actually achieved that. So it's not even what we're trying to do, it is actually what we
That's very true.
what
That's
we
very
are
true.
doing. You know, incredible success stories of people who started with a 3-day event, who knew 36 hours could actually change their lives, and then have reported down the line the increased levels of resilience when life happens, right? And yet they have much higher levels of resilience. They're able to cope with stuff. They're able to keep going. People who have increased their business turnover, people who have recruited the right type of team members, which has saved them an enormous amount of emotional energy, as well as creating time for themselves and fun, because they're able to delegate appropriately to their teams. People who have found relationships or renewed love with their partners through their improved levels of communication, and people who have found themselves able to lead their teams much more effectively through some of the stuff that we teach them around presentation skills. But it all starts with self.
Absolutely. Ultimately, I was referring earlier on to finding a way of putting a mirror up to self, helping someone reflect on who they are today, who they could be tomorrow, and the steps that they need to take, and giving them a support structure that encourages them to take these steps. I've found that incredibly powerful. You refer to business, but some of the sort of best victories I've witnessed are actually in people's personal lives. A word that really fascinates me is the concept of omni. In other words, bringing together one's personal life and one's business life into this holistic presence that people have. It's very satisfying to watch that phenomenon, and that's what's getting me out of bed these days.
Yeah, I mean, so again, two things there. The personal life, well, some of the personal successes have actually been people living their second lives. People who have realized they were incredibly unhappy with the jobs and positions that they held, and have decided to take checks and walk and start again in their 50s.
Yeah.
And
Maybe even 60s.
and their 60s. Yeah, absolutely. So people are actually not being afraid to live their second lives, being free, fun, and fearless. Absolutely. And also, yes, their relationships, and trying to take on new challenges that they never would have considered before. So, of course, one of the things you and I started out was to do a crazy mental. I called it a 26-mile hike, and you said at the end of the day, I thought we were going for a walk. So that was
Walk in the park, wasn't it?
But we've made it an annual thing. We now have Team Nail It, and we've got people who never exercised before who are joining us for marathon hikes to raise money for charity, which is a phenomenal thing and a lovely thing about community. I also want to go back to this word habit, because I think it's very important. People think habit is about doing. I'm going to brush my teeth. I'm going to develop that habit. I've got to take my pills. I'm going to go for the habit of going for a walk. Habits are not just acts. They are thoughts. It's about, when you're talking about mindset, it's about creating habits of how you think, which in turn creates habits of how you believe, which then creates habits of how you act. It's a tiny little thing, which, of course, part of what optimal performance is, and omni-performance, the word you said, is about performing highly in all areas of your life, professional and personal development. But optimal performance, this idea of high levels of sustainability, is about a triad. I call it a triple mastery, right? Which is why we call our Nail It experiences a triple mastery experience, or triple mastery bootcamp, which is about the happiness, which we've touched on, the productivity, that we have touched on, and the balance, which is the omni piece of balancing, having that balance in your life. And in amongst that Venn diagram, we have flow, synergy, and joy. But outside of that, in order to achieve that, is yielding to habits. And they are the way that you think. And really, that's where you start with that bit, influencing everybody from the inside to change their habits from what they believe about themselves and about others and about what's possible, to create this play model: productivity, amuse, live, and yielding to habits to perform and live and enjoy this amazing life.
I used to think that habit change was all about discipline. It was like some form of terrible, painful endeavor that would cost me a lot of money, create a lot of pain, but there would be a reward at the end of it. That was so superficial a way of thinking. What I now realize is that habit formation requires quite a lot of thought as to, why do I need to change? Why do I want to change? What exactly am I trying to achieve? So, for example, we talk about the difference between wants and needs. The number of times in my life I've chased a want, and I've said to myself, Sandro, you need to be really disciplined and you will get what you want. And I was shocked when I didn't get what I wanted, because the habit I was trying to change just basically subsided into the day-to-day grind of life. The reality was I hadn't properly assessed what I actually needed. If I know what I need, then I've got a chance of engaging in behavioral change, habit change, because it's much deeper, it's much closer to my soul and my psyche as to what I'm trying to strive for. So, yeah, habit formation is a fascinating part of our work.
Yeah. Yeah, and it does just start with 1 degree difference. If you just make the tiniest shift over time, you will change, you will shift. Obviously, the bigger the shift you make, then the faster the change. But it does all start with that habit, and that habit is you changing the habit of being yourself, right? That's what we hear so often. And the needs part, of course. Should we talk a bit about nail it?
Yeah, let's go for it. Come on,
I want to bring our story together, though, to think, how the hell did a periodontist and a finance auditor get together under the human condition? Very bizarre, but it actually makes total sense. The unlikely duo. But nail it. So let's start with the N. Needs. Understanding what your needs are is the foundation for who you are and how you drive change, and that creates, as part of our system, is the Kickstart Wellbeing Framework, which includes examining your needs in the first place and realizing that needs are the foundation of who we are. So, of course, we all need food, we need water, but it goes higher than that. So we need connection, you need physical touch, you need transcendence. So what exactly are your needs as a human being? And as you grow and evolve, your needs will grow and evolve. And the mistake I see so many people make is they do not honor their needs, and that costs them.
This is where the herd, from a cultural perspective, conclusion I've come to is, sometimes to be part of the gang, I've got to betray my needs, and I've got to pretend that I want what the gang wants. I want what the team wants, when actually the team itself hasn't properly assessed what it really wants and why it wants what it wants. In other words, it hasn't properly assessed its needs. The N, Rana, is fascinating.
But there is a way of, when you are then working in a company, even if it doesn't align with you fully, there is a way of being able to shift yourself to buy into that need, so that you then perform within that corporation, because you need everybody to perform. You need that buy-in. So the mistake people make, of course, is they end up drained, they end up tired because they're not saying no. They feel guilty. Again, that drains them even more because they're not honoring their needs. And it's one of the biggest barriers we see to people's performance levels, is not honoring their needs, and this idea of boundaries and lack of appreciation. So, of course, it involves examining boundaries, the word edges, communication, which is a massive part of our system that we teach people. So many different types of communication, the work you've done with insights and personality-based communication, the work I've done on energetic, what we call dynamic communication, non-violent communication, verbal and non-verbal communication, the listening piece, and even the presentation skills. So it's something, and needs-based communication, of course. So we teach people all these different types of communication to tap into and use where they need it. And the other bit that, of course, you may have heard me advocating so much, and I've been on TV quite a lot lately, talking about the emotional intelligence aspect, which is huge in itself, right? So, of course, we work with a company that we had top clients from top companies that I'm not sure I'm allowed to mention on this podcast, but you would have heard from them. And we, of course, provide the same training, which is heavily researched and founded by the top schools in America of Yale University and so on, with these emotional intelligence models to allow people to, again, it's back to needs, right? Using emotions as data, recognizing what their emotion is, understanding where it's coming from, not draining yourself through judgment, being able to label it, express it. It's a communication again. And how do you regulate accordingly, both as an individual and co-regulation?
Rana, you're getting carried away by one letter of this system, the N. Talk to us about the A.
The A, attitude. And people say, right, it's the 80-20 rule. Attitude. It all comes down to attitude. And this is something that you touched on, in that people think they want something, but you have to cultivate an attitude and an environment in order to go onto it. And the mistake I see so many people make is they talk about positivity, positive mental attitude, and they think that positivity is going to get them there. And I have seen so often the damage that false positivity has relayed on, because that is the only thing that people hold in their toolbox to put a positive spin on something. And what we often see is that stops driving people into action, because they just sustain themselves at this level of tolerating where ultimately they're miserable.
Yeah. Well, that's the A. The R?
That's the A. So the Sustainable Success Toolkit involves, we look at strength, we look at problem solving, decision making, resilience, grit, determination, smiling, self-talk, optimism, pessimism, all these aspects of attitude and how to shift your attitude. Can we bring in a story here about attitude?
Go for it.
It was our first hike. So you can't see it on the screen, and if you're listening to the audio, you probably can't tell, but Sandro is a little bit more robust than I am in bodily form. Is that a polite way to say it, Sandro?
And we live in a cold country, so therefore one's got to stock up.
You have a bit more insulation than me.
Yeah, absolutely.
There we go. And and I was, would it be fair to say that I was certainly in the past perhaps a bit more active and fitter than yourself?
That's one way of putting it, yes.
There we go. So we're on this hike in the Yorkshire Dales, and before we started this hike, we were warned by the organisers that there were two massive peaks. One was, I think it was around 7 miles, and then at mile 19...
There was a bump in the road, by the way.
There was a 3-mile ascent.
Yes.
Now, this is a beautiful subject about attitude, right? Because you could have remembered that whole time that at mile 19, you've got this 3-mile ascent, and you could have filled yourself with fear, dread, self-talk that there's no way you're going to do it, and stop enjoying the moment, being present and achieving the goal. So there's already an attitude piece there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there I was, a little bit cocky, as you turned up with this minute little rucksack, and I've got all my gear. I'm an experienced hiker. They've given us weather warnings, and I'm thinking he's going to fail. We get to mile 19, and we're on this 3-mile ascent, and I've got these youngsters just racing past us. And I've got blisters on my hands from holding onto my pole so tightly because I was in agony from my hip, and I just could barely put one foot in front of the other. So I needed more than just positivity to get through this 26 miles.
Yeah.
That was my need for regulation. And then the co-regulation was you, so much for me being cocky and making a judgment, because without you instilling that attitude into me, the self-talk, the strength, the grit, the determination, the seeing past the obstacles, the knowing that we were going to get there, that knowing what our end result was going to be, but allowing ourselves to be present in the moment, step by step, just keep taking one step at a time. I never would have got through it without you.
The key thing I took away from that day, though, is that we can beat ourselves up and say to ourselves that we are the arbiters of our own attitude. And to a degree, we are. But that day proved that you were surrounded by a support system. It just happened to be me on that occasion. But that support system allowed you to regulate your attitude in a way that you convinced yourself you could do it in spite of the very clear pain that you were in. Equally, I thought to myself, well, if she can do it in this pain, I am going to do it. And I didn't actually notice the hill. That's two individuals who managed to support each other through quite a difficult period. It's a great story, one that still brings a smile to my face, because
and there was laughter.
Humor is very helpful as well in terms of my own attitude. So.
But there was laughter too, right? I mean, there was
absolutely.
Well, there was laughter. The fact that we were laughing and smiling, and that carried us through as well. It's a massive and a wonderful quality to be able to have, to draw on that resilience. So the I, integrity. Who are you, Sandro?
Who am I? I'm a 63-year-old human being that's still finding himself and believes that he gets a kick out of supporting people. Ultimately, humanity's helping me. The more people I support, the better I feel. That's who I am. I just happen to have picked up a few skills and quite a lot of knowledge in my journey through life, and I now want to support. Why? Because it makes me feel good. That's who I am.
Amazing. So the value of the I is integrity. And again, I see all too often that people just rely on thinking integrity is about honesty or it's about values, and actually is so much more than that. You talked about holding up the mirror, right? There's the authenticity piece. So there's your passion, there's your purpose. What are your drivers for change and to shift? And also understanding that ambition can be unhealthy. So how do you align yourself for sustainability? So in that part, we have 8 sections that make up the valuable being blueprint. And of course, what we take people through exercises and challenges. And we don't put a mirror in front of you physically, but it certainly reveals the blind spots from which you can then navigate.
I think what's powerful for me when we go through these different exercises is that we're not only focusing on what people want to be, we're asking people to reflect on where they come from, their roots, the things that have formed people in terms of their life. I mean, my father was a shoemaker and my mother was a waitress. And if I'm behaving with integrity, I will not pretend that my father wasn't a shoemaker and my mother wasn't a waitress, because they're part of who I am. And taking the things I love about my background is very important to me. So it's a real reflection in character, a real reflection in our ancestors and the people that surround us and the people that we value. I love that word, integrity.
But there's the vulnerability piece as well, right? There's with authenticity about being prepared to show your true self. I talked about my previous career successes and constantly riding on a high and getting validation about myself just from that all the time. And yet, therefore, the success wasn't really from a true, authentic place. And when I actually realized I could let my friends in, whenever I went through a crisis, my friends would always say, "Why didn't you turn to us?" And I think, well, I'm a strong person. I don't need anybody. But actually the joy, peace, satisfaction, fulfillment that now gives me today, I don't necessarily turn to my friends in a crisis, but I share with them. I expose my vulnerability to them, and it has allowed that connection between us to be so much stronger. And it's really allowed me to grow as a person and enjoy even more success.
What I used to think was a simple skill, the skill of storytelling, which to me, through force of circumstance, comes now quite naturally, is actually quite important. You'll hear in the workplace, please bring your authentic self to work. We want to see your authentic self. It's easy to say that. It's actually quite difficult to tell stories to people and share stories with people about one's authentic self. So I really love the work that we do in terms of storytelling. Very powerful when it comes to this word integrity.
Very much so. The storytelling piece in a Nail It experience combined with the 2-minute pitch of what's your story and how you create that instant human connection. Because like you said, whatever the culture is, obviously there is AI now, but even that's developing emotions, is right. So it's what is the story. So the L, that's the fearless bit, right? That's about being limitless, not having any barriers to what is possible. How do you shed yourself from limits? And recognizing what I see all too often is people putting limits on themselves every single day, even with what they think from the second they get out of bed. Oh, it's going to be a hard day today. That is a limit. So what is the self-talk? What goes on? Where are the limitations? What are your beliefs? Of course, we have the boundless beliefs method. Again, it's 7 parts about what are your beliefs? How do you choose new empowering beliefs? Where is the energy around that? What is your leadership? And when we talk about leadership, it's about knowing who you are, what you want, and how you're going to get it. Self-leadership. What is your behavior? How do you instill within yourself your own truth? The truth of who you are, and your foundations are so strong that it doesn't matter. Someone isn't going to trigger you by their own beliefs, because it's what you believe to be true and aligning it with yourself. And then in that, we have the elements of being fearless, which is huge in today's society where anxiety is just an epidemic. It's endemic, isn't it? Fear, stress and anxiety within the workplace. So we have the fearless piece and how to live your life stress-free, both in terms of activities that you do, but again, back to the mindset and the beliefs, so that stress, you can actually thrive from it, use it to your advantage rather than play victim to it.
Rana, let me take you back a few years when you and I, our families, were cocooned in these rooms because we weren't allowed to go out in case we caught COVID. And I must admit, there's many a time when I thought, are we ever going to get out of this rut that we're in? And then the vaccine comes along and changes our society. When we talk about limitlessness, we're talking about people who actually flex their imagination to actually believe that there was a cure, that there was a vaccine, and that we could get it into our society quickly. This way of thinking and all of the techniques that go with it can be life-changing, not for only ourselves as individuals, but for our very societies. So it's one of the most powerful elements of what we're trying to do here. The ability to give people the power of their imaginations in a way that they're not fantasizing, in a way that's very real and very touchable and very achievable.
Yeah, and I think with what we do with taking people through experiences and exercises, and obviously myself having, coached for years, it can take quite a while and a long conversation to find the limiting belief and then work on it. Whereas by taking people through an experience or an exercise, it brings it to the fore so much faster. I mean, again, you like your data, right? So taking people through experience as opposed to sitting on a course or reading a book has a greater retention of 90% more. Huge. 90% more powerful. So when you can draw out that belief, because people have just experienced it by doing an exercise, then you can do something with it. Because so often, because we have coping mechanisms, we don't think that the belief is limiting in some way.
It's a real eye opener, and I hope that our nail it adventure will also prove to be limitless.
Absolutely. And then there is the I. So we're onto the I, which is intuition, which is really something after my own heart. I mean, and I remember when I formally trained as a coach, as opposed to the 25 years before that of shifting patients' behaviors and belief systems.
Your patience, yeah.
Exactly. But of course, that was all mostly around health, but constantly tapping into their mindset, shifting their beliefs. And I asked them, my clients, could you write me a testimonial? And there was one common theme, which they just kept saying, Dr. Rana's intuition is unbelievable. And again, people think that this is something that comes naturally, and it's not. It's something that you are able to train. And all too often, I see people fail because they don't use their intuition. They get stuck in their heads and use all logic and data and statistics, or they get stuck in their hearts and become overcome by emotion. So your intuition, when combined with the other two, if it's a complex decision, is one of the most powerful decision makers. And men are just as capable of intuition as women. You know, it is something that sits there in the brain. And it is a skill that you can learn and you can train. So for that, we have the North Star Navigator, about silencing your brain, which in today's society can be very, very difficult to do. So, of course, we take people through challenges to allow them to experience that. Trust. Again, we take people through experiences about that. Now, the trust, and the other two is stands for attach, which is about connection, and R is about recognizing. But what's interesting there is you touched on trust when it comes to culture, and of course, through some of the other assessments that we do, like the 5 behaviors, trust is at the foundation of that, and should be at the foundation of any culture, based on be it an individual or in an organization, because without trust, you have no foundation to create anything more.
Our corporate worlds have, to a degree, switched off our ability to feel our gut. This gut feel dimension is so important. As I've shared, I used to be an internal auditor, and internal audit is heavily focused on solid data. So you make judgments based on solid data. But if we look at what gut feel is about, in other words, intuition, you're actually using your body, the emotions and the feelings in your body, to make decisions. But where do these feelings come from? They come from data which is in your brain, your experiences, what you've seen, what you've analyzed. Gut feel is an almost instant message to your body and your brain telling you, be careful or go for it. To ignore centuries of evolution is not the wisest thing to do. And this is why intuition, for me, helping people switch on their senses again and listen to their senses, listen to their body, is very, very powerful.
Yeah, it's that it's tapping into the subconscious, because the subconscious is holding all the memories there. So you might not have any logical way of knowing why something isn't right, but there is a memory in that subconscious that is actually warning you. And so often when we go against our intuition, I can certainly vouch for that many a time when I've gone against it, how I've really come unraveled.
I've had some interesting business partnerships where I should have listened to my intuition. I've probably accepted jobs where I should have listened to my intuition, but I wanted to be part of the herd and I wanted to go with the flow, and it didn't serve me very well. So
much more fun to stand out from the crowd. And the last bit, the T in Nail It, stands for tangibility. This idea of tangibility is so much more than just achieving, isn't it? It's about tasting, smelling, living, being. It's about creating the reality that you desire. And again, I really notice so often people who are stuck in their heads talk about SMART goals and thinks that is the way that you achieve. You write down your goals and you follow this SMART system. And I think that's nonsense. It may be part of it, but you need to put what I call fire under SMART goals as well, because SMART goals, you're stuck in your head still about what is possible. You're not coming from a limitless place. So the rapid results generator, that is the tangibility piece, is actually 11 parts where we allow people to, what I call, the acronyms are aim, act, and attain. So how do you create anticipation, intention, and move? How do you just move? What strategies can you have to just go for it? How is the right way to make intentions? Because all too often I hear people say, I am successful. I mean, that is not, these affirmations are nonsense. There are different ways, the right way to create an intention and going forward, and how to actually create shifts within your body and your mind. And all the training I know I've done on neuroscience and neuromindfulness to allow you to propel forward in this anticipation piece. And then we have the act, right? The need for accountability. And again, if you want more statistics, 60% more successful with an accountability partner. But what does accountability look like? Where do you develop confidence from? What is it with talent? Because sometimes you can't just do something. It's all very well having a vision board, but you may need to create talent. So how do you shift yourself from being unconsciously incompetent to consciously competent? And then the attain piece, which is the bit I absolutely love, because that's how you're going to keep on going and keep the cycle going to develop and maintain that growth mindset so that you keep on evolving and bringing other people with you. Do you want me to say what it stands for, or shall we keep it as a teaser?
Let's keep it as a teaser. I mean,
so.
what was important for me in terms of the Nail It system is making sure that what we're doing is grounded in behavioral science. So we have a system that consists of, I believe, 38 very distinct components, all of which are grounded in behavioral science. But when you bring this system and you apply it to the wonderful creatures that we are, it's empowering, it fits my purpose, and I'm really excited about where this journey is going to take us.
Yeah, so it's so let's just talk a little bit about that. If we just backtrack to the fact that I've known you now for what, 17, 18 years, possibly?
Maybe even 25.
Yeah.
Time flies.
You talked about me probing your gums.
Yeah, and sticking needles in my gum.
I walked into my clinic in Wimpole Street at the time, and
I remember it well. Wasn't it Harley Street?
Yes.
That's what I tell my friends.
Yeah, the West End. And I was wowed by this man who was this insightful ball of energy. And even though you were coming to me to look after your gums, I always looked forward to a good old chat and an update about what was going on in your life. And then that friendship evolved. That friendship evolved massively when I was then going through my divorce. And you were a phenomenal support system, and you really introduced me. People always come into your life for a reason. And I think you realigned me with that human condition and the ability to understand who I was, what I was doing, and why I was doing it. Because when you go through a relationship breakup, you can really lose sight of that.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to go back. And since then, you have pushed me multiple times out of my comfort zone again and again and again, as I'm sure I have you. And when you chose to leave Deutsche Bank, I was just couldn't be more delighted, because I thought, great, we can finally get this thing that you and I have co-founded off the ground. And of course, we've run several events now. So we talk about the Nail It event. We've talked about Omni Performance. We've talked about Optimal Performance, and a Nail It Triple Mastery Bootcamp is 3 days of challenges, exercises, and tasks that mimic or simulate. It's a gaming simulation, really, isn't it? That simulate what people go through in everyday life or through work or personal challenges, to bring to the fore the blind spots and the coping mechanisms from which you can then have personalized, individualized, and laser focused coaching and feedback to then take action so that you can shift in multiple directions with whatever your goal and challenge happens to be. And we always make sure we vet people to see where are you struggling, what are your challenges, so that we can tailor that to people specifically. And therein lies the power, because you talked about you go to an event and you're really riled up, and at the end of the weekend you go back to work and life is just as it was. And this for me is the difference, because I believe, as you do, in making sustainable shifts. So we dig deep, we get to the core, we stretch you, and we aim to keep you stretched so that you really do make that change, which is of course why we have the transformation program down the line, and we provide bespoke training. And whenever I get asked by a company to just come in and give us a one-day lecture or half a day's talk, I actually refuse, because I say, I'll feel rubbish, you'll pay a lot of money, and you're not going to see the results. So whatever we do, even in our bespoke training, we always build in that longevity piece down the line to make that sustainable shift in culture. And that's why I absolutely love what we're doing, because we've evidenced those results in those shifts in the human condition.
Experience of that 3-day experience for me has got all the essential ingredients of something that people won't forget. It's got what I call the primacy thing, the first impression. Now, I'm not going to spoil the first impression because it's important we don't spoil it, but trust me, you won't forget it. We then got this concept of rhythm. There's a cadence to the 3-day experience built on the Nail It model that we're sharing with you. The last impression will also be unforgettable. People go away from that experience in a way where they don't want to let go. But there's also what I call the vavavoom moment. I think it comes from this Austrian scientist called Van Restov. There's a firework moment that is also unforgettable. Now, I don't want to spoil the experience. You're going to have to find out, guys. You're going to have to press that button on our website and indulge your curiosity. We really hope you do. And forward to seeing you.
That is part of it as well, right? The part of it is about the fact that you have to actually, when you want to go through life powerfully and in flow, you have to go with the flow. Yep. You have to trust. You don't know the minutiae of every single tiny thing that's going to happen. And so the whole experience mimics that as well, because we push you out of your comfort zone to get you comfortable with the uncomfortable, because that's how you're going to thrive in life, to bring the subconscious out of the conscious, because that's how you're going to grow in life, and to create ease in the dis-ease. That's the idea. So, okay, so where can people find us, Sandro? I think we've explained this, how this unlikely duo have come together, this fascination from 70 years collectively, 40 years of you in the financial sector, 30 years of me in the health and performance sector, and now very much coming together in the human condition. So where can people find us, Sandro?
Nailit.co.uk.
Exactly.
Click the link.
Click the link. So nail-it.uk. So nailit.uk. And of course, our brochure is on the website as well for those who are interested in bespoke training. And I should say here, I should give a shout out to our team, because collectively we have a team of incredibly highly experienced individuals who themselves have their own journeys and have come to this place like us. They are all very, very highly qualified, high-end professionals who have been willing, I feel honored by some of them, to team up with us. Years in corporate world, in sales, on TV, written books, in the pharmaceutical industry, in the health industry, and yet they've all come together to co-facilitate these events. So we have, between us, it must be 150 years of work experience.
Very, very diverse group of people. It's been an absolute pleasure getting together. They've all got stories to tell, but once again, all grounded in vast amounts of know-how that we really hope that you can share our journey and join us. And
of course, like people attract like people, right? So where we work with executives, leaders, professionals, business owners, entrepreneurs, then it brings together this dynamic team at any event where you get to mix in those small groups with those like-minded individuals to learn and grow. And I know as we put people together, they formed these long friendships and being able to network with true value and authenticity, and work together and be together. These wonderful friendships that have formed from a Nail It experience. So yeah, www.nail-it.uk, nailit.uk. We would love to see you at a Nail It experience, wouldn't we, Sandro?
Click on it. See you soon, guys.
Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget my 3 favorite words: be free, be fun, be fearless. Nail it.